Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. Ted Bundy was a man who looked normal, but behind his smile lived one of the darkest secrets in American history. He was smart, polite, and handsome. People trusted him. Women even felt safe around him. But Bundy was hiding a cruel truth. He was a predator who hunted innocent women, using charm and lies as his weapons. His story is not only about murder, but also about deception and fear. It is the story of how one man fooled friends, family, and even the police, while leaving behind pain and horror that would never be forgotten. This is the true crime story of Ted Bundy, the man who showed the world that evil can wear the face of an ordinary man. Ted Bundy was born in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He came into the world as a small baby in a home for unwed mothers. His young mother, Eleanor, was only 22 years old at the time. She did not know what kind of life she would be able to give her son. For a while, she considered giving him up for adoption, but in the end, she kept him. She wanted to raise him, even if it was not going to be easy. Ted never knew his real father. His mother moved with him to Philadelphia, where her parents lived. In that house, Ted grew up thinking his grandparents were his parents and that his mother was his older sister. It was a confusing start to his life, and some people later believed it shaped the man he would become. His grandfather was a strict and angry man, and his grandmother was nervous and weak. Ted often felt like he had no true place in the family. As he grew older, Ted was moved again. His mother took him to Washington State. There, she met a man named John Bundy, who worked as a hospital cook. They got married, and John adopted Ted. Ted now had the name Theodore Robert Bundy, but the relationship between Ted and his stepfather was never close. John was a kind man who tried to bond with Ted, but Ted stayed distant. He preferred to be alone, reading or wandering around. From the outside, Ted looked like a normal boy. He was smart and quiet. In school, teachers noticed he did well in class, though he could be shy. But there were small, dark signs. He liked to look in people's windows at night. He stole small things like knives and magazines. He learned to hide his true feelings and show a face that looked polite and calm. Ted grew into a teenager who felt different from others. He had trouble talking to girls, even though he wanted their attention. He often felt rejected and invisible. To the world, he showed a smile and good manners. But inside, he was angry and cold. He hated the idea of being weak or unwanted. That fear would follow him for life. After finishing high school, Ted went to college in Washington. He studied psychology and later law. At first, he looked like a young man with a bright future. He dressed well, spoke politely, and people often said he was handsome. He even got involved in politics. He worked on campaign teams, and some politicians thought he might one day have a career in government. During this time, Ted also fell in love. He met a young woman who was beautiful, educated, and from a wealthy family. Her name was Diane. She had everything Ted wanted: money, status, and grace. He became deeply attached to her. But the relationship did not last. Diane eventually broke up with Ted, saying he was not mature or stable enough. This rejection cut him deeply. He never forgot it. And later, many of his victims looked similar to Diane. Slim, with long brown hair parted in the middle. Even though he was hurt, Ted kept moving forward. He dated other women, and people around him saw nothing unusual. He volunteered at a crisis hotline where he answered calls from people who were sad or suicidal. Ironically, he gave advice and comfort to strangers while secretly hiding violent thoughts in his own mind. By the early 1970s, something inside Ted began to change. He started giving in to the dark urges he had carried for years. At first, he only watched women from afar. He would follow them, study their habits, and imagine what it would be like to control them completely. Soon, watching was not enough. In 1974, young women began to disappear in Washington. They were all college-aged, attractive, and looked similar. Some were last seen at night, others in daylight. Families were shocked, police were confused, and fear spread quickly through towns and campuses. Nobody knew who was taking the girls. The man responsible was Ted Bundy. He had learned how to lure women using charm and tricks. Sometimes he wore a fake cast or sling, pretending to be injured. He would ask for help carrying books or loading something into his car. Once the women offered help, he would strike. He knocked them unconscious, kidnapped them, and drove them to hidden places. There, he attacked them in the most brutal ways. The missing women cases grew. Witnesses began to give a description of a man who called himself Ted. He was good-looking, drove a Volkswagen Beetle, and pretended to be injured. Police were getting closer, but Ted was careful. He lived two lives, the charming student and volunteer by day and the predator by night. People who knew him could not believe it. Friends and girlfriends said he was kind, funny, and polite. Co-workers at the hotline said he was a good listener. On the outside, he looked like someone who cared. But behind the mask, his mind was filled with cruelty. Ted Bundy was no longer just a troubled young man. He was turning into a monster who hunted women, and the world had not yet realized the full horror of what he was doing. Ted Bundy had become very good at pretending. To the world, he looked like a man who was friendly, intelligent, and calm. But when nobody was watching, he was planning terrible things. By the year 1974, women were disappearing more often. Police had no clear answers, and people grew frightened. Young women were told not to walk alone at night, but even that was not enough. Ted used his charm to trick strangers. Sometimes he wore a sling around his arm and asked women to help him carry books to his car. Other times, he pretended his car was broken and asked them to hold something while he fixed it. Once a woman got close, he attacked. He knocked her out, dragged her into his car, and drove away. Most of the women never came back. The Volkswagen Beetle he drove became his hunting tool. It was small and easy to control, and nobody suspected that such a simple car could be used for such dark acts. Inside, he kept handcuffs, rope, and weapons. The car became a trap, and the women who entered never escaped. At first, Ted worked carefully. He attacked in quiet places, late at night when no one was around. But soon he grew bolder. He began taking women in broad daylight. He even approached them on busy college campuses. His confidence made him more dangerous because he believed nobody could stop him. In July 1974, he made his boldest move yet. On a bright summer day at Lake Sammamish in Washington, thousands of people were enjoying the sun. In the middle of the crowd, Ted walked around wearing a cast on his arm. He introduced himself as Ted and asked several women to help him with his sailboat. Some refused, but 2 women agreed to go with him. Neither woman was ever seen alive again. This event shocked the community. 2 women gone from the same place, on the same day in front of so many witnesses, it seemed impossible. But police finally had something to work with. Witnesses gave descriptions. They said the man was handsome, polite, drove a Volkswagen Beetle, and called himself Ted. For the first time, detectives had a real lead. Still, Ted was clever. He continued his double life. At night, he hunted women. In the daytime, he was the friendly law student, boyfriend, and volunteer. He was even dating a woman named Elizabeth, who lived in Seattle. She thought she was in love with him, though she sometimes felt uneasy. He could be cold, distant, and strange. She once even called police to suggest her boyfriend might match the description of the suspect. But officers had hundreds of names, and Ted seemed too normal to be guilty. Her warning was ignored. In 1975, Ted moved to Utah to attend law school, but his dark habits followed him. Women soon began disappearing in Utah as well. His methods were the same: charm, trickery, and sudden violence. Police across different states started comparing notes. Washington, Oregon, Utah, and later Colorado all had missing women who fit the same pattern. Slowly, detectives began to realize they were looking for the same man. That year, Ted finally made a mistake. One night in Utah, he tried to kidnap a woman named Carol. She fought back and managed to escape. She ran to police and gave them details of her attacker's car. Soon after, an officer spotted Ted's Volkswagen. Inside, they found masks, rope, handcuffs, and tools. Ted was arrested for kidnapping and assault. For the first time, the mask was slipping. While waiting for trial, police began to connect him to other crimes. He was the same Ted from Lake Sammamish, the same type of man seen near other disappearances. His name appeared again and again. Investigators grew more certain he was a killer. In 1976, Ted was convicted of kidnapping Carol and sent to prison. But the story was far from over. In 1977, while facing murder charges in Colorado, Ted escaped. During a courthouse hearing, he asked to use the law library. There, he jumped from a second-story window and ran. Police searched for him for days before catching him again. Back in jail, Ted planned another escape. He studied the building carefully and lost weight until he could squeeze through a small hole in the ceiling. One night in December 1977, he slipped through the ceiling, crawled into an apartment above, and walked out into the cold night. This time, he was gone. Ted fled to Florida, far from the states where police had been watching him. There, he lived under a false name, stealing credit cards and moving from place to place. He was free again, but his hunger for violence quickly returned. In January 1978, he struck in one of the most brutal attacks of his life. At Florida State University, inside the Chi Omega sorority house, he broke in late at night. Armed with a piece of wood, he attacked 4 young women as they slept. 2 of them died, and 2 more were left with terrible injuries. Within minutes, he slipped away into the darkness. The community was horrified. A college campus, a sorority house, young women in their beds, nowhere felt safe. Police worked day and night, but Ted continued moving. He attacked again, this time killing a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly. She was his youngest victim, and her death showed just how far he had fallen into madness. By February 1978, police finally caught him again. This time he was stopped for driving a stolen car. When they checked his name, they realized who he really was. Theodore Bundy, the man wanted for murders across several states. The double life was finally over. When Ted Bundy was caught in Florida in 1978, the mask of charm and lies was finally breaking apart. Police across the country knew his name, and now they had him in custody. But even then, Ted tried to play his games. He smiled, he acted polite, and he spoke as if he were smarter than everyone else. He believed he could talk his way out of anything. But this time things were different. The crimes he committed in Florida were too brutal, too public, and too clear. The attack at the Chi Omega sorority house had left behind survivors, and they described the man they saw that night. His stolen car and fake ID gave him away. The police knew they had the right person. Ted was charged with murder. The trial was set to begin, and it quickly became something the country had never seen before. It was one of the first trials to be shown on national television. Reporters filled the courtroom. Cameras pointed at Ted's face. People at home could watch every word spoken inside. Ted, who had studied some law, decided to represent himself. He liked being in control. He wanted the attention. Standing in the courtroom wearing a suit, he spoke with confidence. To some people, he looked like a young lawyer rather than a killer. But the evidence against him was strong. Witnesses described him. Bite marks on one of the victims matched his teeth. The jury saw through his charm. In 1979, the verdict was read. Ted Bundy was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by electric chair. Still, he did not give up. He kept appealing. He acted like he had a chance to escape again, even though his time was running out. But the Florida murders were not the only crimes waiting for him. Investigators from other states wanted answers. They believed he was responsible for many more deaths, women missing from Washington, Oregon, Utah, and Colorado. Piece by piece, the puzzle of his crimes began to form. While Ted sat on death row, people around the world became fascinated with him. Some were horrified. Others were strangely drawn to him. Women even sent him letters, some declaring love. It was as if his charm still worked, even from behind bars. He was no longer just a criminal. He had become a figure of dark fame. In 1980, another trial came. This time it was for the murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. She had been kidnapped and killed not long after the Chi Omega attack. The evidence was enough to convict him again. He was given another death sentence. Now Ted had 2 death sentences and no way out. Yet he continued to fight. He filed appeals, spoke to reporters, and used every trick he could to delay the end. He even tried to control people's image of him, giving interviews where he claimed to be misunderstood. But beneath the lies, the truth was clear. He was a serial killer, and he had ruined countless lives. Years passed. Ted spent more than a decade on death row. During this time, he began to confess, but in his own strange way. He did not tell everything at once. Instead, he gave small details to investigators, often when it helped him gain more time. He hoped that by offering information about his crimes, he could delay his execution. He admitted to killing women in several states. He described how he tricked them, how he controlled them, and how he returned to the bodies after death. His words were cold and chilling. Sometimes he spoke as if he was telling a story about someone else. He showed no real sorrow, only calculation. The number of victims he admitted to killing was more than 30, but detectives believed the true number was higher. Some missing women were never found, and only Ted knew what really happened to them. As his execution date grew closer, people waited outside the prison with signs and chants. Some cheered for his death. Others simply wanted closure. The families of his victims had carried pain for years, and now they wanted an end. On January 24, 1989, the final day arrived. Crowds gathered outside Florida State Prison. Reporters filled the area, ready to share the news. Inside, Ted Bundy walked slowly to the electric chair. He said his final words quietly, telling people to give love to his family. Then the power surged, and his life ended. When the news spread, people outside cheered. They held signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." For them, it was justice at last. But for the families of the women he killed, nothing could truly erase the pain. Even after his death, Ted Bundy's story lived on. Books, films, and documentaries continued to tell the tale of the man who looked normal but carried such evil inside. He became a lesson for many, that a killer does not always look dangerous, and that charm can hide the darkest heart. Ted Bundy's name became one of the most infamous in history. His crimes showed the world the face of a predator who walked among ordinary people, smiling, studying, pretending until it was too late. After Ted Bundy was sentenced to death, many people thought the story was finished. But it was not. Even in prison, Bundy continued to draw attention. Reporters wanted interviews. Psychologists wanted to study him. Families of victims wanted answers. And Ted himself still wanted control. Bundy was very good at pretending. That was his greatest trick. He looked normal, handsome, and even charming. He spoke politely and dressed well. He smiled when he talked. Many people thought he seemed like a neighbor, a student, or even a friend. But behind the mask was a man who had done terrible things. This made people afraid, but also curious. How could a man like him live such a double life? By day, he was a law student, a boyfriend, and even a volunteer at a crisis hotline. By night, he was a killer, hunting women. He was not the image of a monster from a nightmare. He was an ordinary face in a crowd, and that made him even more dangerous. Psychologists studied him and said he had no empathy. He could not feel real care for others. He was selfish, cold, and manipulative. He did not see women as people with lives and families. He saw them as objects to use and control. This lack of feeling is what allowed him to do such violent things. Bundy also believed he was smarter than everyone else. He thought rules did not apply to him. Even after being caught, he acted confident. He spoke like he could outsmart police, judges, and reporters. His arrogance showed in the way he defended himself in court and in the way he gave interviews later. He believed he was special, even when he sat on death row. People who once knew him were shocked. His longtime girlfriend Elizabeth had warned police years before, but even she found it hard to believe at times. She later described her life with him in a book. In her story, she said there were moments when he was gentle, funny, and caring. But other times he was distant, secretive, and frightening. It was as if two different men lived inside the same body. Even in prison, Bundy wanted power. He gave bits of information about his crimes only when it helped him. He told detectives just enough to keep their interest, but he never gave them everything. He liked being in control of the story. He liked knowing that only he held the final answers. Families begged for truth, but Bundy often stayed silent. He seemed to enjoy their suffering. The families of his victims carried pain that never healed. Many never found the bodies of their loved ones. Some only learned years later what had happened. For them, Bundy's execution was not the end. The grief stayed. The missing chairs at dinner tables, the birthdays never celebrated, the futures stolen. These were the true costs of his crimes. Police also learned lessons from his case. In the 1970s, states did not share information well. Bundy used this weakness. He moved from Washington to Utah to Colorado to Florida, leaving a trail of victims. Each state worked on its own, not knowing the full picture. Only later did they realize they were all chasing the same man. After Bundy, law enforcement created better systems to share information. His crimes forced them to improve. For society, Bundy became a warning. Parents told their daughters to be careful, to trust their instincts, and to never go off with strangers, no matter how polite they seemed. The old idea that a dangerous man would look scary or act strange was broken. Bundy looked safe. That was the lesson. Danger can hide behind a smile. Psychologists, detectives, and even teachers used his story as an example. His taped interviews were shown in classrooms. His behavior was studied in books. He became a symbol of the hidden predator. Even though he was gone, his case was used to warn new generations. At the same time, Bundy became part of popular culture. Documentaries, films, and TV shows told his story again and again. Some focused on his crimes, others on the trials, and some on his charm. People debated whether too much attention gave him the fame he wanted. But others said remembering his story was important because it helped prevent future crimes. Even while in prison, Bundy attracted strange attention. Women wrote him letters. Some claimed they loved him. During one trial, he even married a woman, Carol Ann Boone, in front of the cameras. She believed in his innocence for a while and even had a child with him. But eventually she left him when the truth became too clear. This strange marriage showed how far his manipulation could reach. Bundy's story was not just about crime. It was about deception. He showed that killers do not always look like killers. They can look like students, co-workers, or friends. That was the scariest part of his story. In the end, his name became more than just a person. It became a symbol. People said Bundy to mean hidden evil, false charm, and deadly lies. He was studied, remembered, and feared, not because he deserved fame, but because his crimes forced people to open their eyes. The story of Ted Bundy became a reminder. Evil can live behind an ordinary face. He fooled many, but in the end he could not escape the truth. Even after Ted Bundy was gone, his shadow stayed. People could not forget the story. His crimes were so shocking, his lies so deep, that his name became part of true crime history. To many, he was not just a man, but a warning of how evil could hide in plain sight. In the years after his execution, people continued to write about him. Books were published, telling the story from many sides: detectives, journalists, survivors, and even his former girlfriend. Each one tried to explain who Bundy really was. But even with all the stories, he remained a puzzle. Was he born evil, or did life shape him into a killer? Nobody had a full answer. Bundy himself never gave a straight truth. In interviews, he twisted his words. Sometimes he admitted guilt, sometimes he acted innocent. Sometimes he spoke coldly about the murders, and other times he avoided details. He liked to keep control even in his last days. His silence left holes in the story, and those holes made him more mysterious. But the victims were not forgotten. Families remembered the daughters and sisters who never came home. Some held on to hope until the end, only to hear Bundy finally admit what he had done. Others never received full answers. For them, the pain did not end when he died. The missing seats at family tables, the empty beds, the lost laughter, these were the real marks of Bundy's crimes. Society also changed because of him. Police learned hard lessons. They saw how Bundy moved across states, tricked women, and escaped prison. They realized the old ways of sharing information were not enough. After his case, law enforcement improved their systems. Communication between states grew stronger, and databases were built to track criminals more quickly. Women also changed the way they thought about safety. In the 1970s, many felt safe walking across campuses, hitchhiking, or helping strangers. After Bundy, trust became harder. Parents warned daughters to be careful, to never go with someone they did not know. Even today, advice about personal safety often connects back to the lessons learned from Bundy's crimes. Psychologists kept studying him. They showed videos of his interviews in classrooms. They used his case to explain psychopathy, narcissism, and manipulation. Bundy became the face of what it meant to be a predator who could hide behind a mask. Students of criminology, psychology, and law all learned about him. His story became a dark tool for education. In popular culture, Bundy never disappeared. Documentaries, TV shows, and movies retold the story again and again. Some focused on the crimes, others on the investigations, and some on the people who knew him. Each version added to the legend. Sometimes the attention troubled people. They worried that focusing on Bundy gave him the fame he wanted. But others argued it was important to remember, so society would never forget the danger of people like him. Even decades later, Bundy remained strange in his effect. Some people were fascinated by his charm, even knowing the truth. Others felt sick hearing his name. His story had the power to attract and repel at the same time. This strange pull was part of why his name stayed alive in memory. Bundy's case also inspired changes in how trials were covered. His Florida trial was one of the first shown on television. Millions of people watched, turning a courtroom into a stage. It showed how crime and media could mix, and it raised questions about whether too much attention gave killers more power. In Bundy's case, he enjoyed the cameras. He smiled, he spoke, he acted like he was the star. It was another way he tried to control the story, but in the end, the cameras could not save him. The evidence was too strong, and the jury saw through the mask. The image of him sitting in the courtroom, calm and confident, became one of the lasting pictures of the trial. It reminded people that evil does not always look frightening, it can look ordinary. For survivors, the story did not end with his death. The women who escaped him lived with memories that haunted them. Some spoke publicly, warning others. Their courage showed that even against someone like Bundy, it was possible to fight, survive, and tell the truth. Bundy's daughter, born during his years on death row, grew up in secrecy. She avoided the spotlight, trying to escape the shadow of her father's name. Her life became a symbol of how Bundy's actions hurt not only strangers, but also his own family. Today, Ted Bundy is remembered as one of the most infamous serial killers in history. His name is known around the world, but when people speak of him, the focus is not only on him, it is also on the lessons learned. His story reminds society to stay aware, to question appearances, and to never forget the victims whose lives were stolen. The story of Ted Bundy is not just about murder. It is about deception, trust, fear, and survival. It is about how one man fooled so many and how the truth finally caught up to him. It is a story of justice delayed but not denied. And above all, it is a story that warns. Evil can hide behind a smile, behind good manners, behind the face of someone who seems safe. Ted Bundy showed the world this dark truth, and that is why his story is still told. Ted Bundy's life ended in the electric chair, but his shadow never disappeared. His name became a symbol of hidden danger, a warning that monsters do not always look like monsters. He taught the world that evil can smile, speak kindly, and walk among us without being noticed. The women he took will never return, and their families will never forget. Their stories are the true weight of his crimes. Bundy wanted attention and control, but in the end, what remains is not his charm or his lies. It is the memory of the lives he destroyed. His story continues to be told not to glorify him, but to remind us all. Trust carefully, listen to instincts, and remember that evil often hides behind an ordinary face. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.